this is a church. Let's talk about miracles. That is the subject.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, everyone's fascinated with miracles, even those who don't believe in them. The reality of miracles seems to be one of those topics that has been endlessly discussed since our species began to talk. Let's start by defining a miracle. I like the definition that appears in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Well, I didn't know there was such a thing, but I found out, as revised in 2024. Here it is, a miracle from the Latin mirari, which means to wonder. Remember Miranda from Prospero's, or from Shakespeare's play? Miranda was the woman on the island that is a person to be wondered about.
Oh, okay.
So a miracle at first is a very rough approximation. That was the Tempest, by the way. Is a very rough approximation, is an event that is not explicable by natural causes alone. A reported miracle excites wonder because it appears to require as its cause something beyond the reach of human action and natural causes. Historically, the appeal to miracles has formed one of the primary lines of argument in favor of forms of theism. The argument typically being that the event in question can best or can only be explained as the act of a particular deity. Important stuff. Miracles fascinate us because they're completely outside of our common existence, or are they? People accept them as wonderful, uncommon, and completely unique, and yet almost everyone can recall a miracle or something resembling one happening at some point in their lives. We accept miracles, and yet there are many of us who want to explain a miracle as delusion or caused by a phenomenon that can be explained away by scientific or analytical analysis. Pardon me. This is the premise of every Scooby-Doo episode. And there's my buddies. I really had a crush on Daphne, which at the time was not a perverted thing. I was about the same age. Okay. Christ's miracles. Here he is walking on water in the Sea of Galilee. How many miracles did Christ perform in the Bible? Anybody? It's more than my one hand. 37 miracles. The common answer is 37 miracles. Miracles were an integral component of his ministry. The simplest answer is that he did it to fulfill prophecy. Isaiah was a prophet who foretold the coming of Jesus. In Matthew 11, 2-5, John the Baptist asks Jesus if he is in fact the one who is to come, the Messiah. Jesus answers with a clear allusion to Isaiah 61. Go and tell John what you hear and see. The blind receive their sight and the lame walk. The lepers are cleansed and the deaf hear. And the dead are raised up. That's from Matthew 11, 4-5. Jesus performed these miracles as proof that he was the fulfillment of prophecies about the Messiah mentioned in the Old Testament. Doing miracles spread the renown of Jesus. During his ministry, common people may not have studied the Old Testament in detail or even been able to read, but they had heard the stories about the coming of the Messiah. When Jesus began performing miracles, his renown spread because of them. What about Muhammad and the Quran? Muhammad was of a different opinion concerning miracles. Per Wikipedia, several Quranic verses highlight instances where Muhammad's contemporaries challenged him, just like the Pharisees and Sadducees challenged Jesus, to validate his prophetic claims by demanding that he demonstrate phenomenon that defy the ordinary course of nature, such as causing a fountain to gush from the ground creating a lush garden with flowing rivers, manifesting a golden house, or delivering a readable book from heaven. In fact, he did that last one. However, Muhammad refused to fulfill any of those challenges, reasoning that prophets could not produce a sign without God's authorization. He argued that the regularities of nature already served as sufficient proof of God's majesty and contended that miracles were pointless because they had not prevented past civilizations from rejecting their own prophets. He maintained that he was alive well after Christ had died. He maintained that he served solely as a warner, one who warns, and underscored that the Quran alone was adequate for his opponents. That's from Surahs 29, 50 through 51. And here's 50, 29, 50. And yet they say, why are not signs sent down to him from his Lord, O prophet? The signs are truly with Allah, and I am indeed a clear warner. And it is not enough for them that we have sent down to you the book, meaning the Quran, that has been told and given to them. Surely in it is mercy and a reminder to those who believe. But guess what? They still wanted miracles, just like they did of Jesus. They bugged him all the time. Nevertheless, after Muhammad's death, several devout Muslims who were dissatisfied with their prophet's lack of miracles, partly due to their arguments with Christians, they felt competitive, decided to attribute a range of superhuman qualities to him in post-Quranic texts such as the Hadith and Sirah. For some parts, they also relied on ambiguous Quranic verses that they developed into elaborate narratives, one in particular. Notably, the Quranic verses, which originally focused on a forthcoming event linked to the Day of Judgment based on the sighting of a lunar eclipse, were ultimately transformed by them into a historical miracle, the splitting of the moon. So after he died, they did these things and took a verse that's in the Quran and attributed that as a miracle to Muhammad. But guess what? Christ even tired of the demand for miracles. Matthew 3:16, 2 through 4, and the Pharisees and Sadducees came, and to test him, they asked him to show them a sign from heaven. He answered them, when it is evening, you say, it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning, it will be sorry today, for the sky is red and threatening. You know how to interpret the appearance of the sky, but you cannot interpret the signs of the times. An evil and adulterous generation seeks for a sign, meaning a miracle, but no sign will be given to it except the sign of Jonah. So he left them and departed. The performance of miracles provided relief from suffering and might amaze people, but this was a distraction from his message that all of humanity was now able to be one with God through his sacrifice. Here's a book I recently finished called The Lost Page. It's a fictional book, a story about the investigations of two biblical archaeologists. Yes, that is an actual career. Into the rumor that Mark, or John Mark as he was known, wrote a different coda, meaning ending, to the Gospel of Mark than appears in the Bible. More about that later. The story flips between their present days through traveling through the Levant, meaning Syria, Lebanon, Israel, and the travels of John Mark and Mary, not the Mary you're thinking of, but she was the brother of Lazarus, who was raised from the dead by Christ, as they flee the approaching Romans' sack of Jerusalem and destruction of the Temple of Solomon, I think for the third time. John Mark carries an unfinished version of his gospel, and he continues to interview people who knew Jesus towards the end of his life. His particular interest is in finding a person who personally witnessed the ascension to heaven of Christ after he left the tomb. John Mark has served as secondhand stories of the people who said they saw Jesus after he left the tomb, but cannot find one person who personally witnessed this. And he argues with Mary in the book. Dear Mary, all of what you say I've heard, but I've also heard from Peter himself that many doubted after witnessing the risen Lord in Galilee. Some did not believe the woman who saw the empty tomb. There were many who saw the risen Christ and did not believe even after they saw him. Yes, that is what others have said. The story as it happened and unfolded has other explanations. This is John Mark. Jesus may not have been dead. He may have been taken by Joseph of Arimathea and resuscitated. We do not know. The master did not want people believing in him because of his miracles. And listen to this. He wanted people to believe in miracles because of their faith. Huge difference. That is why I say I may have reached the end of writing his gospel. Would you still believe in the master's teachings if you had heard nothing more than a young man dressed in white saying he had risen? That could mean anything. Later, she states, Mary, I did not witness the crucifixion. Moisten gathered in her eyes. Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, told me about it. They went to the tomb. It was empty. But that is all I know personally. Others I've heard saw Jesus after his crucifixion. They touched him, ate with him, but I did not. I already believed. I saw my brother rise. Even that did not cause my faith. Before that occurred, I believed. That's the point. She had faith before Jesus brought her brother back from the dead. There were those who saw Lazarus when he was dying and saw him walk from the tomb, and they did not believe. It would not matter to me if Jesus did not rise from the dead. The flames had died down as she pulled her robe around her, clutched it at her neck. It would not matter to me if they found his body in the tomb. I heard of some who saw him after the resurrection and still doubted. I knew others believed very differently than I, but it would be of no consequence if the master did not bring back my brother or rise himself from the grave. She reached across the hearth and laid a hand on John Mark's shoulder, patted it for emphasis. I would believe his teachings. Then looked straight into his eyes. They are from God. He was from God. She looked down. I know at first I did not answer your question. I did not want to disappoint you. So what does the book of Mark actually say? The point of the story in the last page was, like Muhammad, Jesus did not say that miracles were the focal point of his ministry. Muhammad said that the book, meaning the Quran, was a miracle. In Matthew 24:35, Christ said, heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. In the actual last page in the book of Mark, verses 16:9 through 19, which I just reread, there is the recount of his appearance to Mary Magdalene, 2 disciples, and to the 11 disciples. Judas was MIA at that point. However, in my English Standard Version Study Bible, these verses are footnoted, meaning these last verses. Longer ending of Mark. These are the footnotes, some ancient manuscripts of Mark's gospel contain these verses and others do not, which presents a puzzle for scholars who specialize in the history of such manuscripts. This ending is missing from various old and reliable Greek manuscripts, as well as numerous early Latin, Syriac, Armenian, and Georgian manuscripts. Early church fathers, Origen and Clement of Alexandria, do not appear to know of these verses. Eusebius and Jerome state that this section is missing in most manuscripts available at the time. And some manuscripts contain verses 9 through 20 indicate that older manuscripts lack the section. On the other hand, some early and many later manuscripts, such as the manuscripts known as A, C, and D, contain these verses 9 through 20, and many church fathers, such as Irenaeus, evidently knew of these verses. As for the verses themselves, they contain various Greek words and expressions uncommon to Mark, meaning the way he wrote the entire rest of the text. It was dissimilar. There are stylistic differences as well. Many think that this shows these verses to be a later addition. Summary verses 9 through 20 should be read with caution. As in many translations, the editors of the English Standard Version have placed this section within brackets, showing their doubts as to whether it was originally part of what Mark wrote, but also recognizing its long history of acceptance by many in the church. There's more, but I don't think that is needed. This is the verse where, oh, by the way, this is the verse where people are commanded to take up serpents and drink poison. Doesn't sound like Mark to me. Okay, conclusion. There is no need for our prophets to perform miracles for us to prove their worthiness or to enable our faith. In Mark 5:25-34, Jesus heals a woman who has suffered from bleeding for 12 years. And from that verse, and there was a woman who had, let me take a drink here. I'm sorry, I'm losing my voice. There's a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years, and who had suffered much under many physicians, and who had spent all that she had and was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard the reports about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. For she said, if I even touch his garments, I will be made well. This is what she believed. And immediately the flow of blood dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of the disease. And Jesus, perceiving in himself that the power had gone out from him, which is a very curious verse, immediately turned about in the crowd and said, who touched my garments? And his disciples said to him, you see the crowd pressing you, and yet you ask, who touched you? And he looked around to see who had done it, but the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, this is our point here today, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease. This dynamic is mentioned in that book. The last page that I just read is John Mark talks to Bartimaeus, who had his sight restored by Jesus. This is a rendition of the picture of that event. John Mark says to Bartimaeus, your healing has given you faith. I believed before I was healed, the man responded emphatically. Bartimaeus, you know better than I, the one writing the gospel over and over, Jesus said that miracles did not produce faith. Faith produces miracles. John Mark placed a hand on the man's shoulder and rose to bid farewell.